Britain's roads are more than mere routes. They are pathways through history, lined with tragedy and whispers of the unknown. Welcome back, fellow travellers, to another ghostly excursion along Britain's haunted highways. This time, our journey takes us past the shadow of the Tyburn Tree, where the condemned seem to linger. We'll glimpse phantom horsemen, encounter roadside graves, and cross paths with spectral pedestrians. So steel yourself, keep your eyes on the road, and join me as we set off once more into the unknown. Marked today by a simple plaque at the junction of Bayswater Road and Edgware Road in central London, the site of the Tyburn Tree is easy to overlook. But for over 6 centuries, this was a place of agony, fear, and bloodthirsty crowds. A place where the condemned met their end beneath the swinging nooses of the city's most notorious gallows. By 1571, executions here had become so frequent that a permanent triangular scaffold was erected. A monstrous structure, capable of hanging up to 24 souls at once. The air must have been thick with sorrow and dread, as the condemned were hanged on an almost industrial scale. Justice at Tyburn was swift, brutal, and indifferent to circumstance. In 1771, Mary Jones, finding herself and her 2 young children homeless and starving, was executed for stealing a small piece of fabric from a shop. And if there was no sympathy for the starving, there was an obscene delight in the hanging of more infamous criminals. In 1725, Jonathan Wild, an underworld gang leader, was pelted with stones on his journey to the gallows as the crowd, who had paid in advance for tickets to watch his death, shouted and swore at him. Early prices for gallery seats to watch the hanging of Dr. Dodd, sentenced to death for forgery in 1777, were between 2 and 5 shillings, rising to half a guinea for admission to a house to watch the horror in comfort. One such house was still standing in 1928, when reports emerged of an extraordinarily sinister atmosphere inside. Investigations revealed that one of the ground floor rooms had been the setting for lavish breakfast parties, where London's elite dined in style while awaiting the sight of another wretched soul swinging from the Tyburn Tree. Tyburn's past is soaked in death, and some believe there's evil in the ground. In 1678, the gallows collapsed during the night, fueling wild rumours that something unnatural had intervened. A pamphlet soon circulated titled "The Tyburn Ghost, or the Strange Downfall of the Gallows," blaming vengeful spirits for the destruction. There were even whispers of a ghostly figure seen perched atop the beams, its neck twisted at a dreadful angle, screeching like an owl in the darkness. Even centuries after the last execution in 1783, the spirits of the condemned remain. In 1909, the famed paranormal investigator Elliot O'Donnell described London's parks as teeming with ghosts, including the phantasms of those who once swung in chains on Tyburn gallows. Today, there are no nooses, no baying crowds, no bodies left hanging in chains or handed off to surgeons, no executioners bickering over who gets to keep the rope, as they did after hanging Earl Ferrers. But Tyburn's cruel legacy is not so easily erased. The thousands who died here did not go willingly. And who's to say they're not still here, unseen but not unfelt, tethered forever to the spot where their final breath was stolen. It's no surprise to note that the scaffold at Tyburn was built at a crossroads. I've touched on these liminal spaces before. Boundary locations which lead everywhere but belong nowhere. The sad, last resting places of those society rejected, from criminals and witches to the destitute and the outcast. The last official Crossroads burial in England took place in 1823, after Abel Griffiths murdered his father before taking his own life. As was tradition, his body was denied consecrated ground, and instead interred at the crossroads of Eaton Street and the King's Road in London. This attracted a large crowd, one so disruptive that it brought the carriage of King George IV to a standstill. And maybe this inconvenience to the monarch led to the passing of the 1823 Burial of Suicide Act, ending the practice of roadside burials. But the shadows of these grim traditions still endure. Across the country, roadsides and crossroads remain visited by those whose bodies were cast into the earth without dignity or peace. Tillot's Lane in Warnham is haunted either by a young soldier who killed himself in the 19th century after the girl he loved turned him down, or by a cattle thief who was hanged for his crimes on a roadside tree. And Cannard's Grave Road in Shepton Mallet is the domain of the restless spectre of Giles Cannard. An innkeeper in the 18th century, Cannard was a thriving man, but his thrift brought no blessing with it, for it was the proceeds of questionable dealing. Yes, Mr. Cannard was involved with sheep stealers, smugglers, gamblers, and highwaymen, finally dabbling in a little forgery. Discovered and facing certain execution, he took his own life before the hangman could claim him. In keeping with custom, his body was dragged to the crossroads and buried with a stake through it to ensure he never found his way home. But death did not bring him peace. His ghost has been seen at the crossroads, a misty figure with an air of dark melancholy. The Well Inn, once named the Cannard's Grave Inn, has also been troubled by strange disturbances. Objects move on their own, cold spots appear without explanation, and on more than one occasion, patrons have sworn they felt an unseen presence watching them from the corners of the room. Perhaps Giles Cannard's punishment did not end with death. Perhaps, bound to the place of his disgrace, he is doomed to wander the crossroads forever, neither here nor there, eternally lost. Equally lost, phantom riders haunt the roads they once travelled, fated to repeat their final journeys. And on a lonely stretch of the B4176, the Bridgnorth Road in Wombourne, such a spectre is said to ride. But this particular tale requires a careful eye. For years, reports have surfaced of unseen horsemen galloping through the darkness, their hoofbeats echoing where no riders can be seen. In the late 1950s, local farmers began complaining of strange damage to their fields and fences, wreckage they blamed on a phantom horseman who only rode under the full moon. Even the police received reports, though what could they do against a ghost? A local news article at the time speculated that the rider must be supernatural. More chilling encounters followed. In 1971, a man named Joe Green was driving home late at night when, without warning, the streetlights lining the road all flickered out. Slowing his car, he parked and stepped out into the darkness, only to hear the unmistakable thunder of hooves. As he turned, a rider loomed into view, galloping several feet above the surface of the road. At the same moment, a fiery glow flared in the sky, and then, just as suddenly as they had gone dark, the streetlights came back on. The sound of hoofbeats vanished. 2 years later, in 1973, a woman riding pillion on a friend's motorcycle claimed their bike suddenly stalled, leaving them stranded on the Bridgnorth Road. Out of the silence came the deafening sound of galloping horses. Though they saw nothing, the terrifying noise of hooves pounded all around them before fading into the distance. It was around this time that the legend of Wombourne's phantom horseman took a new twist. The Black Country Bugle, a local newspaper, published a ballad titled The Ghost Riders, written by rhymer Greensill, which named the spirit as Gideon Grove. This was recounted further in the late 1990s in a local legends book written by Aristotle Tump, and in related articles in the Black Country Bugle. According to these sources, Grove was a servant at Holbeach House, just a couple of miles from Wombourne, who supposedly fled the 1605 siege at that property involving the last of the gunpowder plotters. He was hunted down by the sheriff's men and drowned, his head forced beneath the waterlogged ground. His was the ghost still seen and heard on the Bridgnorth Road. The problem? Rhymer Greensill never existed, nor did Aristotle Tump. Both names were pseudonyms for Harry Turner, the Black Country Bugle's editor at the time. The ballad, the modern retelling, and the newspaper serialisations all stemmed from the same source, and I've been unable to find any historical reference to Gideon Grove, or any pre-1970s link between the Phantom Horseman and Holbeach House. So is the tale of Gideon Grove nothing more than a compelling work of fiction? Perhaps. But that doesn't explain the experiences of those who have heard the spectral hoofbeats, or seen the shadowy rider galloping above the road or under the light of the full moon. The legend of Wombourne's phantom horseman may have been reshaped over time, but something haunts this stretch of the Bridgnorth Road. Something that refuses to rest. The A23, the ancient route between London and Brighton, has seen centuries of travellers passing through the Sussex countryside. But not all of them, it seems, have moved on. For decades, motorists near the village of Pycombe have reported unsettling encounters with spectral figures appearing in the middle of the carriageway. Some, convinced they had struck a living person, have stopped in sheer panic only to find nothing there. One such experience took place on a stormy night around 10 miles north of Brighton. Patrick and June Geary were driving towards London in heavy rain when they saw a lone figure ahead of them walking along the central reservation. A young woman in a white raincoat. Without warning, the figure stepped directly into the road. There was no time to stop. Patrick braced for impact, but instead of colliding with the woman, she seemed to glide up over the bonnet of the car before vanishing completely. Shaken, the couple pulled over. Scrambling out of the car, they searched the roadside, expecting to find an injured pedestrian, but the road was empty. There was no one there at all. Their experience is far from unique. In December 1976, a letter published in the London Evening News describes a nearly identical event. Joan French wrote on behalf of her parents, who had been driving on the A23 when they saw a tall man, dressed in cricket whites and a mac, step off the central reservation before vanishing. A week later, the newspaper was flooded with responses. One correspondent confirmed that the male ghost was common knowledge, seen by many of her friends. Two others claimed to have driven through the figures of a cloaked woman holding hands with a child. Another dismissed all the stories, attributing them to headlights casting strange shapes on trees. And yet, the reports continued. In 1977, Mr. and Mrs. Wright spotted a man in shirt sleeves staggering across the road. Fearing he had been in an accident, they reversed to look for him, but he had vanished. There was nowhere he could have gone so quickly. Further north, near the village of Bolney, 3 young men were driving on the A23 when a woman appeared in the middle of the road. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car should have struck her, yet no impact occurred. Shocked, the men got out, expecting the worst, but the woman had gone. 2 witnesses outside a nearby pub had seen it too. The woman had appeared from nowhere, they said, and when the car hit her, she simply faded. Local legend claims she is the ghost of a woman who lost her life on that very stretch of road many years before. And those who have encountered her speak of the same unease. That somewhere, between headlights and shadows, she still walks. Yet explanations remain elusive. Are these figures echoes of past tragedies imprinted on the road itself? Are they spirits, lost and searching? Or, as one correspondent suggested, are the ghostly sightings simply tricks of the light, headlights dancing on the trees? Whatever the truth, the A23 continues to be a road where the past and present seem to blur, with terrifying consequences. Some roads are dangerous because of sharp bends, poor visibility, or treacherous conditions. But Oldnall Road, a B road running between Stourbridge and Halesowen, is none of these, and yet it has become known as an accident black spot. Like the ghost walkers of the A23, many drivers who have crashed here report the same eerie cause: swerving to avoid someone who wasn't really there. For years, motorists have spoken of ghostly figures appearing in their path, forcing them to veer off course. The most common sightings are of young children in Victorian dress, materialising in the road before dissolving into nothingness. In 2008, Oldnall Road even made national headlines after a surge in reports of drivers crashing in an attempt to avoid a lone child standing in the carriageway. Emergency services found no sign of anyone or anything, leaving investigators baffled. Local paranormal investigator David Taylor took an interest in the reports and soon discovered that for decades, motorists had described spectral encounters along this road. Not just small children, but a well-dressed young woman in period clothes and a menacing male figure in black. One driver even came face to face with what he described as a Victorian gentleman who walked right through his car before disappearing. The sheer variety of apparitions seen along Oldnall Road raises an unsettling question. Why this place? Could history hold the answer? Cradley once had a workhouse on Oldnall Road, established to house the poor. For those who lived and died within its walls, life would have been harsh, marked by suffering, hardship and, all too often, an unmarked grave. Could it be that some of its former residents are still here? Whatever the reason, Oldnall Road retains its reputation as one of the most haunted roads in the Black Country, a place where the past never truly feels at rest. As pathways through history, witness to triumph and tragedy, roads, it seems, can hold on to the echoes of those who came before. From the lingering spirits of Tyburn's condemned to the phantom rider of Wombourne, from lost souls buried at Crossroads to the spectral figures still stepping onto the A23. These haunted highways remind us that not all journeys come to an end. Some roads remain travelled by those long dead, their stories still unfolding in the flicker of headlights and the hush of midnight tarmac. If this is your first journey along Britain's haunted highways, be sure to check out the previous episodes for more eerie tales from the road. If you've had your own unexpected encounters behind the wheel, share them in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and beware of the shadows on the road.